Hey guys, tonight we're going to uncover the 12 worst truths about the badass Queen Elizabeth I, from the smallpox scars concealed under layers of lead-based makeup to her poisonously furious temper that snapped bones with a hairbrush. Her secret affairs, followed by the beheading of loved ones. Her sailor-like swearing. Her brazen privateering tactics. Her ruthless spy networks. And much more. You won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Comment below where you're watching from and your local time. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. And after revealing the invisible wound from truth number 1, let us delve into the psychological depths of Elizabeth I, where that first scar still smoulders, guiding her to the decision of remaining single for life. Truth number 1, the haunting relationship with her stepfather and its psychological impact. When she lost her father, Henry VIII, in the year 1547, 14-year-old Elizabeth suddenly found herself adrift in the opulent royal court. Her stepmother, Catherine Parr, married Thomas Seymour, a power-hungry nobleman, constantly seeking to expand his influence. Though politically advantageous for the throne, this marriage marked the beginning of Elizabeth's torment. Thomas did not hesitate to show excessive familiarity. He often entered Elizabeth's private chambers without knocking, filling her with profound unease. He even tickled her in private moments, leaving her drenched in sweat and shivering, unsure how to respond. These behaviors, though not violent, entirely breached the boundaries appropriate between an uncle and a princess, leaving Elizabeth confused and deeply ashamed. When Catherine Parr discovered what was happening, she decisively separated Elizabeth from Thomas's reach. Yet rumors of an improper relationship spread like wildfire through the court. Whispers claimed Elizabeth had become pregnant by Seymour's son, drawing suspicious glances and gossip from the palace corridors to the council chamber. The young princess became the subject of relentless speculation. Public pressure and humiliation engulfed Elizabeth like an impenetrable cloud. She spent sleepless nights wondering if anyone truly understood her pain. In that state, Elizabeth gradually closed herself off, spoke little with her peers, and remained wary of any close contact with men in the court. Once a carefree girl, she became cautious, keeping her distance from all male companions. The psychological imprint of that period ran deep. Many historians and psychologists agree that the invasion of her private boundaries sowed a fierce desire for self-protection. When she ascended to the throne, Elizabeth publicly vowed to guard her chastity and reject every marriage proposal, declaring she had but one mistress, the Kingdom of England. The Virgin Queen vow was not merely a political statement, but an invisible shield guarding her wounded heart. The image of the chaste queen quickly became a symbol of power. No one could bind her through marriage. No one could exploit personal affection to threaten the crown. Every rumor about Elizabeth's private life hit the chastity wall she had erected. Both domestic and foreign rivals could only see an independent, formidable monarch immune to any romantic ploy. Yet behind that facade lay a loneliness that festered. Elizabeth often turned to letters and her private journal to voice her thoughts. In the secret lines she sent to friends, one can still sense the longing of a young woman craving trust and a listening ear, not merely serving as an icon of authority. "Why does my heart remain empty, even in this splendid court?" she once wrote. This confession reveals her solitude and anxiety. Despite reigning at the pinnacle of power, nevertheless, Elizabeth skillfully transformed her pain into motivation. Every policy she later enacted, from foreign diplomacy to domestic governance to religious reform, reflected her defensive mindset. She built a loyal cadre of officials, trained court members to understand strict boundaries, and established an intelligence network to avoid future surprises. Her vigilance stemmed from those midnight violations. The Queen refused to allow herself to falter again. Looking back at Elizabeth I's ascent to the throne, Truth number 1 stands as the anguished prologue. From the first panic of boundary violations, she accumulated psychological self-defense skills and turned personal disadvantage into political weaponry. She did not merely build a prosperous England. She etched the legacy of a woman who used her pain to forge strength. Only once that early fear was fully contained could Elizabeth confront the next challenge. Could she transform her solitude into the source of compassion and justice? Or would she remain encased in her impregnable armor? Stay tuned for truth number 2, the story of the badass Queen Elizabeth I's absolute power and terrifying wrath. And after the psychological wound of truth number 1 had slowly closed, we step into another dimension, where Elizabeth I's power is enforced by iron discipline and a terrifying wrath that can erupt at any moment. Truth number 2, the Queen's control and her fearsome fury. Elizabeth I quickly cultivated the image of good Queen Bess, a merciful and benevolent monarch. Yet only those who came into close contact with her knew that behind that gentle smile lay a meticulous mind and an absolute instinct for control. Every minute detail in the royal household, from the teacup and attire to the very gait of a courtier, had to be scrutinized. Should anyone dare slacken or show the slightest dissent, Elizabeth would unleash an unforgiving fury. Under her rule, the Tudor court functioned like a clockwork mechanism, precise to every second. Courtiers bowed deeply when receiving her orders. Ladies in waiting passing through her chambers dared not glance back. She placed extraordinary emphasis on protocol. Even a whispered objection could earn a blow or public punishment. The atmosphere in the palace was perpetually taut, every soul trembling in fear. The most infamous example involved her cousin Mary Shelton, who secretly married John Scudamore without permission. When the news reached Elizabeth, she summoned Mary to the throne room with no soothing words. In her rage, Elizabeth seized an ivory hairbrush, an ostentatious symbol of royal luxury, and struck Mary's bare hand with such force that a bone fractured. The crack echoed through the hall, followed by Mary's agonized cries and her stunned, lifeless stare before the Queen's formidable authority. Witnessing this, no one dared breathe aloud, for even a single word might tip the tension into catastrophe. Elizabeth's punishments were not confined to public displays. She wielded royal edicts as weapons to dominate her court. She decreed that any lady in waiting wishing to marry must first petition the Queen and await her approval. Those who defied her, even through clandestine courtships, risked charges of disloyalty, dismissal, or corporal punishment. The deterrent need not be lethal. It only had to be harsh enough to make every girl reconsider before uttering her vows. Elizabeth's surveillance network recorded the very footsteps and voices of her attendants, leaving no gap for resistance. Many historians contend that Elizabeth's fearsome wrath and draconian control policies were key to maintaining her untouchable image. In an era of religious wars and political upheaval across Europe, a monarch whose every move was rigidly monitored conveyed a sense of stability, born of fear. Rival dukes and foreign ambassadors alike dared not openly challenge England, for no one wished to face the Queen's merciless anger. Yet power built on fear is never an elixir of longevity. Retired courtiers later recalled that they traded intimacy for a sterile, stressful work environment. Every banquet was not just a celebration, but a test of emotional restraint. Some were merely glared at, yet spared a formal penalty. The less fortunate were forced to apologize publicly and endure lashes in the Great Hall. According to certain scholars, the root of this terrifying wrath lay in Elizabeth's earliest trauma. She had experienced the violation of her personal boundaries by her stepfather. Tasting helplessness and humiliation, upon ascending the throne, she would never allow anyone to compromise her honor or authority again. Each outburst of anger was, in essence, retribution on behalf of the 14-year-old girl who had been terrified, using fury as a survival reflex to protect her crown and herself. It is hard to imagine a monarch so cold, yet this was Elizabeth I, both a symbol of mercy and a legend of cruelty. The fear induced by her icy gaze became an invisible weapon, compelling deference from both her court and foreign powers. As night fell and candlelight dwindled, the wind rustled through the palace corridors as a reminder. Beneath the palace's gilded veneer, Elizabeth I was ever poised to unleash her wrath and affirm that no one may ever grow complacent. Rest assured, truth number 3 is coming soon. The story of the Queen's secret romances and ruthless decisions, and having witnessed the iron discipline and fearsome wrath of truth number 2, we now step into a realm where Elizabeth's heart both soars and hardens. Truth number 3, the Virgin Queen, with secret passions and ruthless deeds. From the moment she declared herself the one mistress of England and vowed to serve no other, Elizabeth I cultivated an aura of chastity that became her greatest asset. Yet beneath that chaste exterior lay a tempestuous private life, marked by loyalties, betrayals, and a capacity for cruelty that rivaled her capacity for love. At the centre of this storm stood Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, her closest friend and confidant for over 4 decades. Their bond began in childhood, then deepened as they grew into their roles at court. When Elizabeth first ascended the throne, Dudley's steady presence offered comfort against the loneliness of power. Whispers in the corridors spoke of fluttering hearts and hidden smiles shared behind velvet drapes. Many believed Elizabeth truly loved Dudley, yet she refused every proposal, even his choosing instead, to guard her independence above all. When Dudley secretly wed another woman, Elizabeth's anguish cut deeper than any political setback. Her public composure barely masked a private sorrow that lingered for years. She worn black in his memory, summoned him often to council, and showered him with honours, yet never granted him the title of consort. Even after his wife's untimely passing, when any other monarch might have embraced second marriage, Elizabeth remained resolute. The crown, she believed, demanded her undivided loyalty. Through tears and banquets alike, she preserved the legend of the Virgin Queen. But Dudley was not her only secret flame. In the dead of night, she exchanged perfumed letters with the Duke of Anjou, whose French charm and scholarly wit both flattered and endangered her English heart. Sir Walter Raleigh received clandestine audiences that lasted into dawn, each moment a dance of intellect and desire. Thomas Henneage, a loyal courtier, carved her initials into rosewood desks as tokens of affection. These liaisons, though discreet, left traces of longing in the Queen's court tokens burned in hidden fireplaces or sunk into the Thames to avoid scandal. As Elizabeth aged, her affections turned toward Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, Dudley's stepson. 33 years, her junior, Essex arrived at court with youthful ardour and military ambition, igniting sparks in the aging Queen. She lavished him with silken robes, granted him command of expeditions, and even permitted him to dine privately at her table. For a time, the court buzzed with hope that Essex might finally breach the barrier between monarchy and matrimony. Yet ambition proved a darker force than affection. Essex, frustrated by limited command and impatient for glory, led a misguided rebellion against his sovereign. Troops marched on London, daring to seize the palace gates. When Elizabeth learned of this betrayal, the same compassion that once sheltered Dudley hardened into steel. She summoned Essex to stand trial, watched solemnly as evidence of treason was read aloud, and refused all pleas for mercy. The execution of Essex was among the cruelest spectacles of her reign. On the scaffold at Whitehall, the Queen's face remained impassive as a sword fell, severing life in an instant. The crowd gasped at the sight of blood, then scattered in hushed fear. In that moment, Elizabeth's willingness to sacrifice even the most beloved adherent underscored her ultimate priority, the security of her throne above all else. This stark juxtaposition of genuine passion and unflinching ruthlessness renders Elizabeth's Virgin Queen persona fiercely multidimensional. She could weep at a private letter, then issue a public decree condemning that same correspondent Her ability to compartmentalize emotion and authority ensured her reign's stability, yet it also magnified her loneliness. Admirers saw a goddess who transcended human frailty. Detractors saw a tyrant cloaked in velvet. Elizabeth's secret loves and decisive punishments speak to the paradox at the heart of her reign. Love provided her with solace and inspiration, while ruthless action asserted her sovereignty and preempted rebellion. In balancing these extremes, she wove the fabric of her legend. A monarch whose personal sacrifices and public displays of power alike served to anchor her 17-year hold on the English crown. Thus, truth number 3 reveals the Queen not merely as a symbol of purity, but as a woman able to channel her deepest longings into an unbreakable fortress of authority, whether shedding tears over Dudley's fate or pronouncing Essex's death. Elizabeth demonstrated that even love must yield to the imperatives of reign. And so, having seen her heart tested by passion and steeled by betrayal, we prepare to uncover truth number 4, where the Virgin Queen's very words shocked listeners, as though spoken by a common sailor. And as the echoes of her secret loves and ruthless verdicts fade, we now turn to truth number 4, the Queen who swore like a sailor, Elizabeth I, daughter of Henry VIII, presented herself to the world as a paragon of refinement and courtly grace. Yet at moments of anger or frustration, she would unleash a string of oaths so coarse that even hardened soldiers blushed. Picture a magnificent sovereign draped in sumptuous velvet, her elaborate wig piled high with pearls. Then imagine that same regal figure, spouting curses fit for a pirate crew on stormy seas. The contrast was as shocking in the 16th century English court as it would be today. Contemporaries recalled that in the midst of an audience with ambassadors or during lavish banquets, the Queen might suddenly break protocol with a flurry of expletives. These guttural outbursts, peppered with obscenities, startled etiquette, scholars and clergy alike. One envoy from France admitted in his memoirs that he had never witnessed a monarch employ language so earthy. To him, the sight of a crowned head issuing profanity was essential proof that Elizabeth was not to be trifled with. This unorthodox habit was widely believed to have its origins in her father's own temperament. Henry VIII, famed for his roaring temper and crude speech, had often declaimed curses in the royal chamber when displeased. Elizabeth inherited not only his formidable will, but also his propensity for coarse language. Yet, whereas Henry might have used profanity in private fury, Elizabeth weaponized it publicly, transforming every swear word into a reassurance that she ruled on her own terms and feared no challenge. Historian after historian has argued that the Queen's use of profanity served multiple purposes. First, it shattered the stereotype that women of noble birth must remain demure and soft-spoken. By swearing boldly, Elizabeth signaled that she would not be confined by gendered expectations. In her own way, she declared, "I can wield the sword of language as deftly as any lord can brandish a rapier." This rhetorical choice helped her command respect from male courtiers who might otherwise have underestimated her. Second, her salty language functioned as a form of psychological warfare. Imagine the effect on an advisor who approached with a slip of protocol, or a foreign dignitary who mispronounced a single syllable. The Queen's sudden eruption of foul-mouthed rebuke would leave the offender flustered and fearful, their confidence irreparably shaken. In that moment, Elizabeth held absolute sway over mind and body, demonstrating that she could dismantle composure with mere words. Third, swearing allowed Elizabeth to mask vulnerability under the guise of aggression. Whenever she faced a diplomatic impasse or internal dissent, a well-timed curse acted as a shield. It diverted attention from her nerves or uncertainty and projected an image of unassailable authority. In essence, profanity became a tool of statecraft, a means to keep court factions off balance and maintain an aura of unpredictability. Court diarists also noted the theatrical flair with which Elizabeth delivered her expletives. She favoured vivid metaphors and inventive similes, comparing traitorous nobles to rotting carcasses, or admonishing lazy ministers to fetch themselves a spine or be damned. Such colourful language resonated more strongly than polite rebukes, It lingered in the air like a challenge. The Queen's voice, usually measured and mellifluous, would shift to a harsh tenor that reverberated through the hall, ensuring that no one remained in doubt about her displeasure. Yet Elizabeth's swearing was not gratuitous. She did not pepper her speech with obscenity for its own sake. Rather, each oath served a strategic function: to emphasize key points, to punctuate proclamations, or to underscore her displeasure. When negotiating with rival ambassadors, she might lean forward, lower her voice, and swear solemnly to seal a commitment. Those who witnessed such moments believed that an oath from Elizabeth carried more weight than any written treaty. In private correspondence, she maintained her courtly style, reserving curses for face-to-face encounters. Her letters to trusted confidants show polite phrases and careful diplomacy, suggesting that her swearing was consciously deployed before those she wished to awe or intimidate. She understood that public displays of raw emotion could enhance her mystique while preserving decorum behind closed doors. The Queen's penchant for profanity also had limits. She avoided obscene references to religion or royal lineage, steering clear of blasphemy that might provoke the clergy or scandalize the populace. Instead, she crafted a lexicon of original oaths that skirted the most taboo corners of Elizabethan speech. This ingenuity allowed her to appear both irreverent and respectable, an impossible balance that only she could maintain. By challenging the conventions of polite society, Elizabeth created a new paradigm for female rulership. She demonstrated that a queen need not be endlessly mild-mannered to command loyalty. Her words course, surprising, unforgettable, became another facet of her formidable persona. Courtiers learned to brace themselves for the unexpected sting of royal profanity, and foreign envoys knew that to transgress her will invited not only political reprisal, but also verbal onslaught. In the flickering candlelight of Whitehall's Great Hall, amid the clink of goblets and the rustle of silks, the Queen's swearing emerged as a spectacle in itself. The nobles leaned forward, their ears straining for each barb, for the taste of raw power in her voice. The gentry, once bound by rigid etiquette, found themselves caught between scandalized shock and perverse admiration. For in those moments, Elizabeth transcended the role of monarch. She became a force of nature, her tongue as sharp as any blade. And so truth number 4 unveils the dimension of Elizabeth I that shattered expectations and seized attention. She harnessed profanity not from rash impulse, but from calculated intent, forging an indelible connection between her regal authority and her earthy humanity. As we step away from the scandal of her curses, we prepare to confront truth number 5, where the Queen's affection for her executed mother reveals a tender vulnerability beneath the veneer of steel. Stay tuned for the next shocking revelation, and having witnessed her coarse oaths that echoed through the great halls, we now turn to an even deeper, more intimate chapter, truth number 5, the secret love Elizabeth I bore for her mother. Executed as a traitor. When Anne Boleyn fell from Henry VIII's favour and was executed in the year 1536, English society recoiled in horror. Her name was uttered only in whispers, her memory cast into the shadows as though she had never existed. Yet for her daughter Elizabeth, then just around the age of 2, the loss was irrevocable. Too young to understand politics, she nonetheless sensed the void left by a mother's absence. As she matured, that void transformed into a wellspring of devotion, a secret flame she guarded with utmost care. Upon her accession, Elizabeth embraced the mantle of sovereign with all its weight. Yet she never let the world forget the initials that defined her origin. Cloaked in sumptuous gowns of violet velvet or forest green brocade, she always wore a delicate pendant bearing the interlaced letters A and B. The engraving was subtle enough to escape casual notice, but to Elizabeth it pulsed like a heartbeat against her chest. Hidden within the secret clasp was a painted miniature of Anne Boleyn herself, a tiny portrait that Elizabeth touched in moments of solitude, renewing her private pledge to honour her mother's memory. This tender homage extended beyond jewelry. Elizabeth revived the fortunes of families and retainers who had once been favoured by Anne. She bestowed titles, lands, and offices upon those whose loyalty to her mother had cost them dearly under Mary's reign. Men and women who had been forced into obscurity or exile found themselves elevated once more, often to the amazement of court insiders. To some, these acts looked like shrewd politics, an effort to secure allies among factions still loyal to the Boleyn legacy. But to Elizabeth, each appointment carried the weight of personal gratitude and filial love. Court gossipers speculated that Elizabeth was deliberately replaying her mother's influence through her own reign. Yet she never flaunted these gestures. Publicly, she spoke of duty, faith, and service to England. Privately, she kept her anger at Anne's fate, simmering beneath a veneer of regal composure. In diaries and letters exchanged with her closest confidants, such as Sir Francis Walsingham, she spoke of a whispered guidance she felt in times of doubt, as though her mother's spirit still walked those corridors of power. Historians debate how much of this was calculated statecraft, and how much pure filial devotion. Certainly, the Boleyn name carried both prestige and controversy. By rehabilitating her mother's circle, Elizabeth risked angering nobles who had prospered under other dynastic alliances. Yet she pressed on, convinced that the memory of Anne Boleyn was more powerful than any political peril. In her mind, restoring her mother's honour was a moral imperative, a way to rescue Anne's spirit from oblivion. Perhaps the most poignant testament to Elizabeth's secret love was her private ritual before every major decision. She would retire to her private chambers, retrieve her mother's locket from beneath the folds of her garments, and hold it to her heart. The old court accounts record that she sometimes requested the silk lining of the chamber walls be swathed in blue, the colour associated with mourning and memory, so that in those moments of reflection she could almost sense Anne's presence. Whether contemplating marriage offers or dispatching letters to foreign monarchs, that minute portrait and its hidden initials, Alexandria, remained her lodestar. Yet even the strongest devotion carried its shadows. Elizabeth's refusal to marry, her famed decision to remain the Virgin Queen, owed partly to that first wound inflicted by her mother's death. She feared repeating the cycle of love and loss, of power seized only to be torn away. The same resolve that preserved her chastity also sealed her emotional walls. Courtiers lamented her reluctance to form genuine bonds, describing her as both aloof and unapproachable. But Elizabeth accepted that sacrifice. She believed that by protecting her heart from further harm, she honoured her mother's memory and ensured her own ability to rule without distraction. In public ceremonies, Elizabeth often paused before a portrait of Anne Boleyn that hung in the royal chapel. She would linger in silent prayer, her lips barely moving, as though she spoke directly to the mother she had never truly known. These moments, then recorded in private logs, revealed a queen who was as much a daughter as she was a sovereign. For Elizabeth, every gilded pageant and diplomatic triumph retained a trace of personal grief, transformed into an enduring tribute. As the goddess passed, the locket itself became fragile. Its hinges worn by use, Elizabeth entrusted it to her most trusted keeper, her lady of the bedchamber, and insisted it be pressed to her dying cheek. When the inevitable twilight of her reign approached, she ordered a second locket crafted, identical to the first, to ensure that even if one were lost, her devotion would never fade. After her passing, that second miniature found its way into the royal archives, a silent testament to the secret love that had guided her rule. Truth number 5 reminds us that beneath the armour of statecraft and the glare of courtiers, Elizabeth I remained forever the daughter of Anne Boleyn. In wearing a hidden portrait, rehabilitating her mother's allies, and risking political currency to safeguard a personal legacy, she wove a narrative of redemption through love. H0rrible, celebrated for stability and achievement, bore the indelible imprint of a mother's love, severed by the axe, yet immortalized in a queen's unyielding heart. And so, having explored the tender devotion that shaped Elizabeth's most private choices, we prepare ourselves for truth number 6, when the Virgin Queen's indiscriminate sweet tooth leaves her with a haunting physical reminder of human frailty. Stay tuned for an uncanny glimpse into the rotting teeth behind the royal smile. And so, having witnessed the Queen's loving tributes to her fallen mother, we now turn to a far less noble, yet equally human consequence of Elizabeth's reign. Truth number 6, the black, rotting teeth, born of her insatiable sweet tooth. Elizabeth I ruled in an age when sugar was more precious than gold, reserved exclusively for the highest echelons of society. As queen, she enjoyed unfettered access to candied fruits, crystallized preserves, marzipan confections, and exotic syrups shipped from Europe and the New World. Banquets overflowed with honeyed tarts, sugar-glazed pheasant, and jellies so thick they gleamed like gemstones under the chandelier light. What began as a delicate indulgence soon evolved into a habit bordering on compulsion. A morsel of sweet here, another cloying pastry there, until the Queen's palate demanded more and more sugar with every waking hour. Over the years, this unrestrained appetite exacted its toll. The enamel of her teeth, once cared for by the finest royal dentists, began to flake and erode. What remained turned an unmistakable shade of black, a direct result of sugar's relentless assault on her oral health. Cavities formed deep within, causing sharp stabs of pain with every morsel she dared to bite. The same sugar that elevated her status also betrayed her body, transforming the Queen's smile into a hidden landscape of decay. Aware that her teeth had become a liability, Elizabeth adopted a repertoire of measures to conceal the damage. In formal audiences and diplomatic receptions, she rarely parted her lips in anything resembling a full smile. Instead, she cultivated a demure, closed-mouth expression, accentuated by high, ornate collars and double chins, fashioned from layers of fine lace. Embroidered veils and wide ruffs served as elegant masks, drawing attention upward to her regal countenance and sumptuous gowns, and away from the sorrow hidden in her jaw. Yet concealment was only half her strategy, aware that she could not simply outshine decay with finery forever. Elizabeth summoned the royal apothecary to develop remedies from the herbal lore of the realm. She chewed on clove and pennyroyal to numb aching nerves, while poultices of crushed mint and rose petals formed makeshift toothpacks applied directly to sore areas. At court, courtiers whispered of her discreet use of thin splinters of juniper wood as toothpicks, dipped in strong spirits to sterilize the wound between the gums and the rotten tooth. These treatments offered only temporary relief. The Queen still suffered bouts of excruciating pain that forced her to break fasts or abandon elaborate state dinners. Chronic discomfort threatened her composure, but she refused to yield. In the quiet of her private chambers, surrounded by velvet cushions and perfumed tapestries, she would grip the arms of her gilded chair and endure each pulsing throb in stoic silence. Only the hush of night and the soft rustle of her lady-in-waiting skirts would witness her most vulnerable moments. To the public, however, the spectacle of a mighty monarch undone by sugar carried a note of tragic irony. Here was the Virgin Queen, celebrated for her purity and incorruptibility, undone by the very delicacies that symbolized luxury and refinement. Court satirists soon began to sketch her with a grimace, a gaggle of jesters, whispering that her empire might last longer if she cut back on sweetmeats. Such jibes did little to faze Elizabeth. If anything, they affirmed her belief that power and indulgence were inextricably entwined. Behind the scenes, foreign ambassadors found the topic irresistible. Dispatches from the Spanish envoy in London described how he had once been dazzled by Elizabeth's white ruff and glistening jewels, only to notice, in a narrow corridor, the glimmer of decay at the corner of her closed mouth. He recorded in his journal that he felt both awe and pity, recognizing that even the most exalted sovereign could not escape nature's laws. Those reports, sent back to Madrid and beyond, spread her legend as a ruler, both majestic and deeply human. In the end, truth number 6 serves as a reminder of our shared vulnerability. Even at the pinnacle of power, Elizabeth I was subject to the consequences of her habits and the inexorable progress of time. Her rotting teeth, both a source of private agony and public fascination, humanized a queen who otherwise seemed invincible. They underscored that indulgence, no matter how sumptuous, carries risks, and that grandeur often conceals hidden frailty. As candlelight flickers across the panelled walls of the Tudor court, the echo of Elizabeth's discreet moans blends with the clinking of sugar spoon against bowl. This truth bomb resonates with a dual lesson: that pleasure can betray, and that even icons of strength bear wounds beneath their gilded veneers. And so, as we step back from the Queen's decayed smile, we brace ourselves for truth number 7. A harrowing account of how Elizabeth narrowly escaped execution at the hands of her own half-sister. Stay tuned for the next dramatic revelation, and as the echo of her rotting teeth faded into the darker recesses of memory, Elizabeth found herself confronting an even more perilous trial through truth number 7, nearly executed by her half-sister, Bloody Mary. In the year 1553, the sudden death of her half-brother, Edward VI, threw the Tudor succession into chaos. Edward had attempted to bypass both of his half-sisters in his will, elevating Lady Jane Grey to the throne. But that scheme collapsed within days when Mary I, known to history as Bloody Mary, mustered enough support to depose the so-called 9-Day Queen. Mary's brutal crackdown on Protestant dissent earned her a fearsome reputation, and she viewed Elizabeth, a Protestant by faith, as a dire threat to her reign. Without hesitation, Mary ordered Elizabeth's arrest. The princess was confined in the dank, forbidding Tower of London, where traitors awaited their fate. For 2 long months, Elizabeth endured the damp stone walls, uncertain whether dawn would bring mercy or the axe. Guards patrolled her cell day and night, their footsteps echoing like the tolling of a death knell. Every gust of wind through barred windows sounded like a whisper, reminding her that even royal blood could not guarantee safety. Elizabeth's isolation was almost complete. Letters from friends were intercepted or destroyed. Visits from ladies in waiting were forbidden. She subsisted on meagre rations. Her stomach knotted with fear as she contemplated how close she stood to the scaffold. In her private journal, later discovered by chroniclers, she confessed, "Every night I pray that God will spare me this terror, for I know not what mercy lies ahead." Desperate to save her life, Elizabeth finally proclaimed her innocence and loyalty to her sister on public record. In front of a tribunal of nobles and bishops, she denied any involvement in Protestant uprisings and renounced all hopes of interfering with Mary's rule. This carefully scripted submission spared her from a formal death sentence, yet did not grant her immediate freedom. Instead, Mary opted for a subtler form of punishment: house arrest under tight surveillance. Thus began nearly a year of enforced confinement within the royal palaces, where Elizabeth was overseen by courtiers loyal to Mary. She was forbidden from attending court functions or mingling with foreign diplomats. Even her personal chaplains were replaced by clergy sympathetic to Catholic restoration. The princess lived under constant watch, her every word and gesture reported back to the Queen. This year of captivity left Elizabeth with an enduring lesson: power, even when inherited, remains fragile in the face of political upheaval. From that crucible of fear and uncertainty emerged a profoundly altered leader. Elizabeth never forgot the sting of betrayal by her own sister, nor the precariousness of her royal birthright. Wherever she went, she insisted on layered security measures, including coded correspondence and private intelligence networks. Any envoy or courtier with perceived loyalties to Mary was carefully vetted. The lesson was clear: familial bonds offered no protection in the ruthless struggle for the crown. Historians note that Elizabeth's experience in captivity deeply influenced her later policies. She approached every alliance with caution, balancing mercy with vigilance. Her famous policy of religious moderation, often referred to as the Elizabethan settlement, was shaped by her sister's harsh repression, determined never to repeat such cruelty. She nevertheless reserved the right to bind and restrain potential rebels, but always under the veil of legal procedure rather than arbitrary violence. Elizabeth's narrow escape also informed her public speeches and proclamations. She understood the power of presenting strength while concealing vulnerability. When addressing Parliament, she would recall the loyalty of her subjects, never hinting at how close she had come to the block. Yet those who listened carefully perceived the subtle iron beneath her velvet words, a sovereign who had looked into the abyss and returned stronger. The physical reminders of her ordeal lingered as well. Witnesses reported that Elizabeth's once bold eyes held a guarded intensity in the years following her house arrest. She smiled more sparingly, as though every laugh might attract unwelcome attention. Her steps faltered only when alone, suggesting that the weight of her sister's threats had carved a permanent shadow on her spirit. Perhaps most revealing was Elizabeth's refusal to allow any member of her own family near the line of succession. She strictly regulated marriages among her courtiers and kin, fearing that any union might kindle loyalties beyond her control. The memory of Lady Jane Grey's fleeting reign and Mary's subsequent vengeance haunted her, compelling Elizabeth to tighten scrutiny over courtship and inheritance alike. Yet alongside this caution, Elizabeth maintained a measured clemency toward her former jailers. When Mary I succumbed to illness and the realm hailed Elizabeth's accession as queen, she chose not to punish most of those who had enforced her captivity. This act of mercy underscored her desire to heal the realm's divisions, while affirming that justice would be tempered by wisdom and restraint. In the end, truth number 7 reveals a queen forged in the fires of near execution, who emerged determined, watchful, and unyielding. The spectre of Mary I's iron justice followed Elizabeth throughout her reign, reminding her that a crown can shift with alarming swiftness, yet it also taught her the transformative power of forgiveness and the art of balancing strength with grace. Now, as dusk settles once more over the corridors of power, we prepare for the next startling revelation, truth number 8, where the Virgin Queen's obsessive attention to her image leads her to demand that all women around her dress in somber simplicity, leaving no rival to outshine her radiance. Stay tuned for another chapter in the saga of Elizabeth I, and so, having witnessed Elizabeth I's capacity for both ruthless justice and measured clemency, we arrive at truth number 8, where the Queen's obsession with her image leads her to mandate monochrome attire for her ladies-in-waiting, ensuring that no rival might ever outshine her radiance. Elizabeth cultivated a personal wardrobe so vast it defied belief. More than 1,000 elaborately embroidered gowns in sumptuous velvets and silks, each accessorized with glittering jewels and hundreds of pairs of brightly colored gloves. She never repeated an ensemble, parading before foreign ambassadors and noble guests as an ever-changing symbol of wealth and power. Every gown, every necklace, every feathered hat was a calculated statement, the sovereign as living spectacle. By contrast, her ladies-in-waiting, young women of noble birth, chosen for their beauty and grace, were ordered to don only black or white gowns. These two somber hues formed a uniform backdrop against which the Queen's vivid colours could explode like a star at the centre of a constellation. In the glow of candlelight, their silent forms receded into the shadows, while Elizabeth shone forth, the singular focus of every gaze. At court festivities and state banquets, the effect was theatrical. Rows of ladies, their expressions neutral, stood like sentinels along the chamber walls. Only the Queen moved among them, gliding, smiling, gesturing her vibrant attire and lavish ornaments, more arresting for the uniformity that surrounded her. To walk into one of her entertainments was to step onto a stage where she alone commanded the spotlight. All others existed merely to complement her brilliance. This decree went beyond mere fashion. It communicated an unambiguous message: power concentrated in one person, dependency in many. By stripping her ladies of any opportunity to rival her beauty or status, Elizabeth enforced a visual hierarchy that mirrored court protocol. A single glance at the procession of plain-clad figures trailing her made clear that true authority belonged to her and her alone. Not everyone greeted this mandate with enthusiasm. Some ladies chafed at the loss of personal expression, born into privilege. They had once delighted in pastel satins and rose-embroidered bodices. Now, forced into a wardrobe of stark simplicity, they felt their individuality suppressed, their self-worth diminished. In hushed gossip and behind closed doors, some dared to complain that the Queen's insistence bordered on vanity rather than necessity. Yet Elizabeth remained unwavering. To her, the consistency of image was essential to sustaining authority. She believed that a monarch's appearance must be as disciplined as her policies. A single misstep, a mismatched ribbon, or an errant brooch could undermine the careful equilibrium she maintained between awe and obedience. By codifying her lady's dress, she closed the door on distraction and doubt alike. This attention to sartorial detail reflected a broader desire to control every aspect of court life. Elizabeth's life had been shaped by early trauma, betrayal by family, threatened execution, the crushing weight of expectation. From those wounds grew a resolve to master her surroundings. If she could dictate the fabric in which her attendants dressed, she could shape the atmosphere of power itself. Over time, the ladies-in-waiting internalized this rule. They learned not to dream of grandeur for themselves, but to find pride in serving the Queen's magnificence. Devotion turned into discipline, and discipline into a kind of reverence. The black and white mantles became badges of honor, marking those deemed worthy of proximity to the sovereign's glory, even as they surrendered their own. This ritual of monochrome also offered a strategic advantage to Elizabeth in foreign diplomacy. Visiting envoys arriving at Whitehall encountered a court meticulously choreographed to exalt its ruler. The stark arrays of black and white intensified the visual drama, leaving ambassadors convinced they were witnessing a sovereign in total command. Gifts and treaties were negotiated under the Queen's watchful gaze, in an environment where every detail reinforced her supremacy. In portraits commissioned near the end of her reign, Elizabeth is painted standing alone against a backdrop of drapery in subtle greys and blacks, her robes blazing with jewel tones that defy drabness. The artists understood that the contrast itself told the story of her reign, a queen whose authority was absolute, whose image was meticulously curated, and whose presence overshadowed all others. As candlelight flickers through the high gallery at Hampton Court, the memory of those uniformed ladies in waiting seems to freeze in time, each one a silent testament to the Queen's will. And though the black and white garments have long since faded into history, their echo remains in the legend of a monarch who refused to share her radiance. Having explored how Elizabeth wielded fashion as a tool of power, we now prepare to uncover truth number 9, where the Virgin Queen's flawless facade hides scars of disease and a reliance on deadly cosmetics to maintain her illusion of perfection. Stay tuned for another astonishing glimpse into the life of Elizabeth I, and following the stark visual tableau of truth number 8, where monochrome attire underscored Elizabeth's supremacy. We now turn to truth number 9, a tale of smallpox scars and the lethal lead makeup she used to conceal them. Before Elizabeth ascended to the throne, she endured the ravages of smallpox, a perilous affliction in the medieval world. The disease left her face pocked and scarred, and even caused patches of her auburn hair to fall away. For a princess whose every expression was scrutinized, these disfigurements were a blow to both vanity and political viability. Determined not to surrender her public image to nature's whims, Elizabeth adopted an extreme cosmetic regimen centered on Venetian ceruse, a mixture of lead and vinegar famed for its ability to mask blemishes with a brilliant white finish. Venetian ceruse was, however, a double-edged sword. Its lead content, corrosive and cumulative, gradually ate away at the skin's natural defenses. Elizabeth applied layer upon translucent layer of this mercury white powder, creating the illusion of flawless alabaster skin. Yet beneath the porcelain facade, her dermis grew ever thinner, more fragile, and increasingly prone to deepening wrinkles. To maintain the pristine surface demanded even more ceruse, trapping her in a vicious circle. Each attempt to hide her scars only bred fresh damage, necessitating further concealment. Complementing her lethal makeup, Elizabeth employed elaborately crafted wigs to camouflage thinning and patchy hair. These headdresses, woven from human tresses and horsehair, were bleached or dyed to a brilliant white, reinforcing her image as the messenger of light, a beacon of divine authority. The wigs were architectural marvels, towers of curls, braids, and ribbons often costing more than a gentleman's annual stipend. When donned, they transformed the Queen into a living statue of radiance, diverting onlookers from the fissures beneath. Despite these efforts, maintaining the illusion was a relentless ordeal. Elizabeth required an army of ladies in waiting to attend her morning ritual, each layer of makeup meticulously set with powders scented by rosewater and crushed violets. The slightest smudge or sweat bead could betray the fragile artifice. So the Queen endured hours ensconced in private chambers before emerging for public audiences. Courtiers noted that a flicker of candlelight across her visage would sometimes catch flecks of cake-like powder drifting to the floor, a silent testament to the fragility of her constructed perfection. The health implications were severe. Lead poisoning manifested in fatigue, headaches, and digestive distress. Chronic exposure forced Elizabeth to seek remedies from the royal apothecaries. Concoctions of diluted wine infused with herbs, poultices of comfrey and marigold, and even patches of raw honey intended to soothe, but often exacerbating her condition. On state occasions, she would discreetly nibble on candied ginger or mint leaves, both for flavor and to mask the metallic tang that lingered in her mouth. Yet it was not merely vanity that drove Elizabeth's dependency on such harmful cosmetics. In the world she ruled, appearance was inseparable from authority. A queen's visage served as the foremost declaration of her right to govern. As long as Elizabeth projected an image of otherworldly purity, she commanded the reverence and obedience of her subjects. Any visible imperfection risked undermining that sacred aura, providing fodder for political adversaries to question her divine mandate. At times, Elizabeth herself reflected on the paradox of her predicament. In private letters to her closest confidants, she confessed a weariness with the daily performance. "Each morning I don the mask of lead and lace," she wrote, "and by night I am left hollow." Yet she never wavered in her commitment. The cosmetic ritual became a political act, a silent but potent assertion that she would not yield her throne, nor her dignity, to the scars of illness or the ravages of age. Historians today view Elizabeth's use of Venetian ceruse as a chilling metaphor for her reign. On one hand, it exemplifies her unyielding will to hide vulnerability and maintain an unassailable front. On the other, it reveals the hidden cost of power, the physical toll of perpetual artifice, and the emotional strain of concealing personal trauma. The Queen's porcelain mask masked not only the pockmarks of smallpox, but also the deeper scars of betrayal, loss, and the constant fear that her humanity might eclipse her majesty. In the flickering glow of torchlight at Whitehall, Elizabeth's visage must have appeared both ethereal and eerie, an alabaster idol seated upon England's throne. Behind her coldly perfect exterior lay a mortal woman, enduring pain and risking her health to uphold an image that transcended flesh and blood. This duality, political necessity, entwined with private torment, renders Truth Number 9 one of the most poignant revelations in her saga. And so, having peered behind the Queen's mask of white powder, we prepare to confront Truth Number 10, the daring yet dubious enterprise of privateering she championed to strike at Spain, turning pirates into national heroes. Stay tuned for another startling chapter in the life of Elizabeth I, and having glimpsed the hidden toll of her porcelain mask, we now turn to Truth Number 10, the daring enterprise of licensed privateering against Spain. In an era when the Spanish crown boasted the mightiest fleet on the planet, Elizabeth I faced a dilemma: how to weaken her rival's naval supremacy without declaring open war. The answer lay in letters of marque, official commissions that transformed bold sea captains into state-sanctioned pirates. By granting these documents, Elizabeth empowered figures such as Sir Francis Drake and Sir H0rrible to strike at Spanish galleons laden with treasure from the Americas, all while preserving England's ostensible peace. Sir Francis Drake, perhaps the most celebrated of these privateers, embarked on voyages that combined exploration with plunder. With a handful of galleons and a brash crew, he stalked the Spanish Main, intercepting vessels bound for Seville. Each captured cargo silver ingots, pearls, and exotic spices was divided between the crown and the marauders themselves. Drake's circumnavigation of the globe, achieved in a whirlwind of raids and narrow escapes, returned to England not only with vast wealth, but with proof that Spain was vulnerable on the high seas. Meanwhile, Sir H0rrible, equally ambitious, turned his privateering exploits towards seizing Spanish ports and disrupting New World shipping. He outfitted small flotillas to harass treasure fleets and raid coastal settlements, funneling his share of booty back to the Queen's coffers. Raleigh's actions earned him knighthood and landed estates, yet also provoked furious protests from the Spanish ambassador, who lodged vehement complaints, accusing England of sponsoring outright piracy. Elizabeth's response was characteristically measured. She neither denied her commissions nor publicly endorsed the raids. Instead, she maintained a studied ambiguity, allowing denials in diplomatic correspondence, while tacitly celebrating those who returned laden with gold. At court, these privateers were feted as heroes of the realm. Banquets in their honor featured toasts to "our gallant sea dogs," and richly embroidered portraits immortalized them in leather jerkins and feathered hats, their spoils gleaming at their belts. This strategy of noisy clandestinity achieved remarkable results without formally waging war. Elizabeth expanded England's maritime influence and enriched her treasury. The influx of precious metals fueled urban growth, bankrolled fortifications, and financed the Royal Navy's gradual expansion from a handful of vessels into a formidable fighting force. Meanwhile, rumors of English corsairs prowling the Atlantic struck fear into Spanish captains, forcing them to travel in larger convoys or arm their merchantmen for defense, slowing the flow of commerce. Privateering also served a diplomatic purpose. In negotiations with France or the German principalities, Elizabeth could demonstrate her ability to strike back at Spain without violating peace treaties. Envoys from distant courts arrived with a new respect for England's sea power, gauging their alliances against the backdrop of daring raids on Spanish treasure ships. By leveraging private adventurers, the Queen projected power in peacetime and pointedly reminded adversaries that she reserved the right to disrupt their trade at will. Yet this blend of legality and lawlessness carried dangers. Some observers warned that privateering encouraged undisciplined violence, with unsupervised crews sometimes attacking neutral or even English vessels by mistake. Complaints reached Elizabeth's ear of English merchants robbed by rogue captains beyond her control. To counter this, she instituted oversight measures. Captains had to submit logs and inventories for Crown inspection, and any excess violence against non-Spanish targets could lead to forfeiture of their commission. Despite these checks, Elizabeth's willingness to exploit privateering revealed her pragmatism. She saw statecraft as a toolbox, and piracy as one of its instruments. If Spain's power rested on its oceanic treasures, then by chipping away at those riches through privately financed raids, she could rebalance the geopolitical scales. The Queen's bold endorsement of these maritime brigands anticipated the age of empire and signalled that England would not hesitate to blur the lines between commerce, warfare, and exploration. Across Europe, reactions varied. The Pope condemned England's sea plunder, while the Ottoman Sultan sent emissaries intrigued by the notion of licensed robbery. closer to home. Merchants in London raised concerns about escalating insurance costs due to the threat of privateers on all seas. Elizabeth, ever shrewd, assuaged their fears by quietly funneling royal funds into merchant convoys under naval escorts, ensuring vital trade continued even as her sea dogs roamed the waves. By the end of her reign, privateering had cemented England's reputation as a maritime challenger to Spain. The Armada's attempted invasion, though ultimately repelled by wind and weather, encountered a naval force seasoned by its captain's experience in raiding and skirmishing. Many of those who had once plotted courses for plunder now stood ready to defend the crown in open battle, their daring forged in clandestine enterprises. Truth number 10 thus reveals the Queen's keen combination of audacity and subtlety. In sponsoring privateers, Elizabeth embraced risk, sanctioned semi-legal violence, and exploited every resource to safeguard her realm. She recognized that in an age of emerging empires, the control of the seas was paramount, and if she could not field Spain's vast armada, she could unleash a swarm of private vessels to harry it. It was a gambit that paid off handsomely, enriching and empowering England while sowing doubt and fear in her rival's heart. And as her privateers carved England's maritime destiny, we now turn to truth number 11, the tale of the Queen's most enigmatic counsellor. The alchemist and astrologer John Dee, Elizabeth I was celebrated for her shrewd political mind. Yet she harboured a deep fascination with the arcane, John Dee, often called her most trusted teacher, embodied that blend of reason and mysticism, a learned mathematician, devoted alchemist, and skilled astrologer. Dee first instructed the young princess in Neoplatonic philosophy, teaching her to see the divine order in both the heavens and the earth. His star charts guided her most significant decrees, advising on the auspicious moments to issue edicts or embark on voyages. Under his influence, Elizabeth looked beyond Europe's shores toward a new imperial destiny in North America, where she hoped England's flag might claim fresh realms. Dee's reputation extended beyond mathematics and celestial observations. He maintained a famed partnership with Edward Kelly, a self-styled medium who professed to converse with angels through elaborate spirit rituals. Though modern scholars cast doubt on the authenticity of these seances, Elizabeth believed wholeheartedly. She granted Dee unprecedented access. His private chambers were established adjacent to the sacred heart of the palace, where state secrets were discussed. There, Dee pored over confidential correspondence, consulted arcane manuscripts, and relayed what he called heavenly mandates to his sovereign. This devotion to the supernatural underscores a twofold dimension of Elizabeth's rule. On one hand, she was a consummate realist, negotiating alliances, balancing European powers, and directing a burgeoning navy with clear strategic goals. On the other, she felt that earthly calculations alone could not secure her reign. By engaging Dee's supernatural counsel, she sought to harness forces beyond mortal comprehension, an extraordinary alliance between crown and cosmos, designed to fortify her authority. Elizabeth's reliance on Dee did not go unnoticed among courtiers and foreign ambassadors. Whispers spread of secret midnight meetings in candlelit chambers, where Dee's polished black obsidian scrying stones revealed portentous visions. Delegations from France and Spain questioned whether her decisions were guided by genuine statecraft or by arcane whispers from another realm. Yet few dared challenge her openly. Her regal composure and Dee's scholarly gravitas kept skepticism at bay. The Queen's partnership with Dee also sowed the seeds of England's overseas ambitions, inspired by his celestial maps that hinted at uncharted lands. Elizabeth commissioned voyages to the New World. Her backing of expeditions to Virginia and beyond stemmed not only from political considerations but from a conviction that Providence favoured England's expansion. Dee's mystical counsel became woven into the very fabric of her imperial vision. Ultimately, the legend of John Dee and Elizabeth I reveals her as a ruler of remarkable complexity. She wielded logic and diplomacy with precision, yet also embraced the mystical with equal fervor. By blending the empirical with the esoteric, she cultivated an air of invulnerability, an aura that left her ministers in awe and her European rivals unsettled. To posterity, she stands as both a sovereign of unparalleled pragmatism and a patron of the mysterious. Her throne as much sustained by philosophical insight as by celestial decree, and having witnessed the uncanny fusion of pragmatism and mysticism in truth number 11, we now arrive at truth number 12, the masterful intelligence strategy that ensnared Mary, Queen of Scots, and sealed her fate. Supreme power in Elizabeth's realm rested not only on military might, but on the hidden currents of information. Enter Sir Francis Walsingham, the sovereign's ever-watchful eye and ear, who spent years weaving a network of spies across England and continental Europe. Walsingham deployed encrypted letters, covert informants, and meticulously planned traps to unearth evidence against those who plotted against the crown. His operations moved in shadows, where intercepted correspondence and turned agents delivered intelligence that was both timely and damning. The pinnacle of Walsingham's achievements came with the so-called Babington Plot, a conspiracy aimed at assassinating Elizabeth I and elevating Mary Stuart to the English throne. Walsingham astutely planted agents within Mary's close circle, ensuring each letter she penned to her co-conspirators in France and Spain passed through his hands. Using cipher-breaking techniques and double-crossing couriers, he gathered an unassailable paper trail. Messages from Mary approving the midsummer assault, instructions for her loyalists, and even expressions of hope for foreign intervention. Armed with this incontrovertible proof of treason, Elizabeth faced a wrenching decision. Mary was not merely a political rival, but her cousin, sharing the same royal bloodline. Yet the Queen understood that mercy for one could imperil the many. In the year 1587, Elizabeth signed the death warrant that condemned Mary Stuart to execution. The sentence, carried out at Fotheringhay Castle, marked a turning point, a testament to the Queen's resolve to sacrifice familial ties in defence of national security. The seamless partnership between Walsingham's espionage network and Elizabeth's resolute will produce a spectacle of power that was both elegant and ruthless. No blade was drawn in open battle, nor was a single cannon fired. Instead, the invisible war of intelligence achieved what armies often could not. Mary's downfall was scripted in cryptic ink and intercepted dispatches, then enacted before a silent court that watched as head and heart was severed from treachery. This chapter in Elizabeth's reign solidified her reputation as the ultimate badass queen. She demonstrated that a sovereign's greatest weapon might be a mind as sharp as any rapier, wielded through agents who operated beyond view. The execution of Mary Stuart sent a chilling message. Even the highest born could not contravene the crown without paying the ultimate price. Yet truth number 12 also underscores a darker theme, the moral ambiguity of intelligence work. Walsingham's methods involved deception, manipulation, and betrayal of trust. Agents feigned loyalty. Friendships were a currency to be spent, and every letter became a potential trap. Elizabeth's acceptance of these means reveals her pragmatism. She believed that safeguarding the realm justified any covert tactic. In the flicker of torchlight, as courtiers whispered of angels and alchemists, the hush that followed Mary's execution spoke volumes. England had emerged more secure, its throne protected by cunning and resolve, but the price was heavy. A queen sacrificed, a royal bond shattered, and a monarch who learned that power and paranoia, loyalty and betrayal, often walk hand in hand. Thus concludes our journey through the 12 most astonishing truths about Elizabeth I's reign, each facet revealing the complexity behind her legend as history's ultimate badass queen. And so we have together unveiled the 12 most horrifying truths about the badass Queen Elizabeth I. From childhood traumas and terrifying fits of rage to tragic love affairs, a smile hiding blackened teeth, state-sanctioned privateers, a ruthless espionage network, and the toxic lead makeup she wore, each revelation not only exposes a darker side, but also illuminates the vulnerable, ambitious, and brilliant facets of one of England's greatest symbols of power. We do not strip away her legend to cast blame or slander her. Rather, we seek to understand that behind every royal shine lie scars, ruthless decisions, and an often unspoken loneliness. This exploration helps us appreciate the multidimensional nature of humanity, extraordinary and yet profoundly ordinary. Elizabeth I, with all her light and shadow, deserves to be studied and pondered as a historical figure who teaches us how power is forged and how youthful wounds can shape an entire reign. Thank you all for joining me on this journey through the life of our badass queen. I wish you a restful night and dreams filled with historical wonder. Don't forget to hit like if you found this video helpful, and subscribe so you won't miss the next fascinating episode. Sleep tight.